"Move him," she said, "or I don't go on." She didn't say it to me, though I was the one holding her wig block and a cup of throat tea gone cold in my hand. She said it to the air over the king's guard's shoulder, the way famous people say things, as if the words will find their own way to whoever has to obey them. The sentry stood at the wing arch in his red tunic and tall black bearskin, white gloves crossed on his rifle, eyes forward, on the king's stand of the Royal Lyric Theatre, where he had stood since 6 o'clock and would stand until the last note of a gala none of us would ever forget. He did not move. He did not look at her. He was not, in fact, in her way at all. The prompt side was clear. The stage was clear. Her mark was painted in luminous tape 8 feet to his left. But Seraphine Voss had decided that the man in red was the reason her evening was going wrong. And once a star decides a thing like that, the whole building bends around the decision or breaks trying. I am a stagehand. My name is Tom Aldridge, and I have run the fly floor and the prompt corner of the Royal Lyric for 19 years, which means I have seen a great many people behave very badly in a very small amount of darkness. I know where every rope goes and what every rope holds. I know that the thing above your head in a theater is always heavier than it looks. And I know now, better than I ever wanted to, what a man trained not to move is actually for. But that night I knew none of it yet. That night I just had a cold cup of tea and a wig block and a diva pointing at a guardsman as though he were a chair set down in the wrong place. "Did you hear me?" she said, louder, and now it was to me. "Tell the toy soldier to stand somewhere else. He's putting me off. I can feel him looking at me." He was not looking at her. I want that on the record first, because everything that came after grew out of that single false thing she chose to believe. His eyes were forward, fixed on the dark of the auditorium where, in 2 hours, the king and the queen in a hall full of patrons would sit. The guard's whole art is to look at nothing and see everything, and Seraphine Voss had built an entire career on the opposite art, on being looked at, on never for 1 second being able to bear a room where the attention pointed anywhere but at her. The man in red was a hole in her attention. He gave her nothing back. To a woman like that, nothing is the cruelest possible thing, and she had decided to make him pay for it. "He's the king's guard, Miss Voss," I said, as gently as a man can say a thing he knows will not be received. "He's posted to the royal box approach and the stage right honor stand. He can't move. It's not me, it's not the house, it's the standing orders. He stays where he's set." "Everything moves for me," she said, and she smiled when she said it, and that smile is the thing I remember most clearly of the whole night because it was a true smile, an actual happy one. She believed it the way you and I believe the sun comes up. Everything moves for me. Stagehands moved for her. Directors moved for her. 3 husbands had moved for her, and a record label, and an entire touring company that had been rebuilt twice around her colds and her moods, and her midnight demands for white lilies, with the stamens cut out, so the pollen wouldn't stain her gloves. The world had spent 20 years teaching Seraphine Voss that it would rearrange itself the instant she frowned, and tonight it had sent her, at the apex of her life, to perform for a king, in the most beautiful theater in the kingdom, and parked, 8 feet from her light, the one thing in that building that would not move for her at all. I should tell you what the night was, so you understand the size of what she was standing in. It was the sovereign's gala for the founding of the Royal Lyric, 300 years to the season since the first stone of the house was laid. The whole evening was built around a single object, and that object is the reason the King's Guard was on the stage at all, and the reason I will be telling this story until I am too old to climb the ladder to the grid. Center stage, on a low plinth under a sheet of museum glass, behind a velvet rope, lit by one soft pin from the #1 bar, stood the founder's lantern. You will have to take my word for what that lantern is, because there is not another like it. It is a hand lamp of worked silver and old bronze, no taller than a man's forearm, made by the first master of the house 3 centuries ago and carried, by tradition, at the head of every opening night since, lit from a flame that the records say has never wholly gone out, passed candle to candle down the years through fire and flood, and one long dark war when the theater was shut, and a single old doorkeeper kept the wick alive in a tin in his cellar, so the house would have a flame to come back to. It is not the silver that makes it priceless. It is the unbroken flame. The kingdom has crowns worth more in coin. It has nothing worth more in meaning. And on the 300th anniversary of the house, it had been brought out of its case in the foyer and set, for one night only, at the center of the stage, so that the king himself could carry it up the aisle at the climax of the gala and light from it the new lamp that would burn for the next 100 years. Two things guarded it, a sheet of glass and the king's guard. That was the standing order Seraphine Voss had run into like a woman walking into a glass door. She was too busy admiring her reflection to see. The sentry was not posted to spoil her light. He was posted to the founder's lantern. He stood the honor stand because the most precious object in the kingdom's keeping was 4 strides from her mark, and a man does not stand 4 strides from a 300-year flame and then step aside because a singer doesn't like the look of him. She didn't know that, or she knew it and it meant nothing to her, because nothing meant anything to her that was not about her, and that, in the end, was the whole shape of the night. A woman who could not see anything in the world but her own light, standing beside a flame that had outlasted 300 years of people exactly like her. Tom. It was Marguerite, the company stage manager, at my elbow, her headset pushed off one ear, her face the particular gray of a woman who has been managing Seraphine Voss for 6 weeks and has nothing left in the tank. What does she want now? She wants the king's guard to stand somewhere else. Marguerite closed her eyes. Of course she does, tell her. I've told her, he's on the lantern, he can't move. I know he can't move. Marguerite opened her eyes and looked at the sentry, and something passed over her tired face that I'd see on a lot of faces before the night was out, a kind of envy almost, for a man who got to stand in one place and simply not be part of any of it. God help me, I'd give a year's wages to be him for an hour. Just stand there. Just not have opinions at people. She pressed her headset back to her ear. Right, I'll talk to her. You stay near the lantern line. If she gets anywhere near that plinth, I want a body between her and it. Are we clear? We're clear, I said, and that was the first sensible order anyone gave that night, and I have thanked Marguerite for it every Christmas since. Here is the thing about the rehearsal, the thing the audience never saw and never will, the thing that was the whole real performance of the evening, though no ticket was sold for it. For 2 hours before the doors opened, Seraphine Voss waged a small private war against a man who would not fight her, and lost every engagement, and could not understand why, because she had never in her life lost to stillness before. She began with the director. She swept up to old Henshaw in the stalls and announced that the guard was a distraction, that no artist of her caliber could be expected to give a king the performance he deserved with a mannequin breathing down her neck, and that the man must be moved or the chief patron's office would hear about it. Henshaw, who had directed 40 seasons and survived a great many Seraphines, told her with enormous courtesy that the placement of the king's guard was a matter for the royal household and the palace, not for the theater, and that he had no more power to move that man than to move the river. She told Henshaw he was finished. Henshaw bowed and went back to his notes. He was not finished. She was, though none of us could see it yet. She tried the house manager. She tried the patron's liaison, a nervous young man in a borrowed dinner jacket who went white and then green, and then fled to find someone senior, which is the entire function of nervous young men in borrowed dinner jackets. She tried, God help her, to bribe me, pressed a folded note into my hand on her way past and murmured, "Have him gone by the half, there's a darling." And I unfolded it after she'd swept on, and it was enough to cover 3 months of my rent, and I gave it to Marguerite, who gave it to the house manager, who put it in an envelope with a note of the time and the circumstance, because we are a respectable house, and because, though none of us said the word, We had all begun to understand that we were keeping a record now, of what we didn't know, but a record. And through all of it the sentry stood. I was near him for most of it, at the prompt corner, my hand on the lantern line, and I will tell you that I watched his face the way you watch the sea before weather for the smallest change. There was none. The bribe passing, the threats, the young man fleeing, the diva's voice rising and rising in the stalls until the cleaners stopped their hoovers to listen, none of it reached him. Once, only once, a stage weight on a rolling rack came loose 2 feet from his post and started to topple, and his white glove came off the rifle and caught it and set it back, soundless, and was crossed on the rifle again before the rack had stopped rocking, and his eyes never left the dark of the house. That was the only time he moved in 2 hours. For a falling weight, not for her. I think that was when I first understood dimly what he was. He was not ignoring her out of rudeness or scorn or some trained contempt. He was simply not available to her. His attention was already committed, all of it, to the lantern and the dark and the safety of the room, and there was none of it left over for a woman who wanted some. To be ignored, you have to first be noticed and then set aside. He had not set her aside. She had simply never entered the field of things he was responsible for. And that, not the red coat, not the bearskin, not the rifle, that was the thing that drove Seraphine Voss out of her mind. Everyone she had ever met had been available to her. Here was a man who was not, and could not be made so, and the more she pushed, the more plainly the whole building could see the one thing a star cannot survive being seen. That the world did not, in fact, revolve around her, and never had, and that the proof was standing 4 strides from her mark in a pair of white gloves, looking at something more important than she was. By the half-hour call she had stopped trying to move him and started trying to beat him. There is a difference, and the second is much more dangerous. The house filled. From the fly floor where I went to set my lines, I watched the gold and the black and the white of 300 years of patrons come up the aisles, the orders and the ribbons, the old families and the new money, and at the last, to a sound the building makes only a handful of times in a generation, a deep, soft rising of every person in the hall to their feet at once. The king and the queen came into the royal box, and the lights dropped. And the founder's lantern at the center of the stage was for a moment the brightest thing in the kingdom. One small, steady flame under glass with a man in red standing beside it like the flame had grown a century of its own. The gala began. It was, for the first hour, the most beautiful thing I have ever worked. There was an orchestra, and there were dancers, and there was a boys' choir from the cathedral school whose voices went up into the grid where I sat and made the steel hum. And then at the top of the second half, after an introduction that called her the greatest voice of the age, Seraphine Voss came out onto that stage to sing for her king. And I have to be honest, because honesty is the only thing that makes the rest of it bearable. She was, for about 90 seconds, magnificent. The voice was real. Whatever she was as a person, the gift was true, and for 90 seconds the whole house forgot the green room ugliness and leaned toward her the way a field of flowers leans toward the sun. And you understood how a person could come to believe that everything moves for them, because for 90 seconds everything did. Then she turned her head, mid-phrase, and saw the king's guard. I don't think she had truly registered, until that moment under the lights, that he would be there during her number. The honor stand was a fixed post. He had been on it since 6, but a stage is a strange country and the lights cut the world down to what they touch, and I think in her mind she had won the argument hours ago and he had been disposed of along with old Henshaw and the bribe, and all the other things the world was supposed to move for her. And here he was, lit at the edge of her light, red as a wound on her beautiful blue evening. Looking though he was not, he was looking at the dark, looking to her, straight through her, on the one night in the one place, in front of the one audience that was supposed to be wholly and only hers. She faltered, one note. To anyone in the house it was nothing, a breath, a human flicker in a long phrase. To Seraphine Voss it was a catastrophe, because she had not faltered in front of an audience in 20 years, and she knew exactly why she had faltered. And the reason was standing in a red coat 4 strides away, refusing to the very last to give her the one thing she had asked the whole night for, which was simply to be the most important thing in the room. What happened next happened fast, and I had the worst and best seat for it, 40 feet up on the fly floor with my hand already, by old instinct, drifting to the lines. She stopped singing. She stopped in the middle of the kingdom's most important evening in front of the king, and she turned from the audience, turned her back on the king, which I have never in my life seen a performer do and hope never to see again. And she walked fast, her train hissing across the boards, straight at the king's guard, and she screamed at him. I won't write what she screamed. It was not language fit for the house, and it was certainly not fit for the box, and it went up into the grid where I sat as a single raw tearing sound with no music left in it at all. The sound of 20 years of being told the world would move for her colliding at full speed with the 1 square foot of the world that wouldn't. She screamed at him to look at her. She screamed at him that she would have him broken, dismissed, jailed. She got close enough that her face was inches from his, close enough that I saw her spittle catch the light, and she shrieked into the stillness of him, "Look at me." He looked at the dark of the house. His gloves stayed crossed on the rifle. He did not move. And the whole hall, 300 years of patrons, the king, the queen, the cathedral boys watching from the wings with their mouths open, the whole hall saw it, saw her, saw the famous voice turned into a screaming woman in a beautiful dress, and beside her, unbruised by any of it, a man in red who simply would not be moved. There was no need to expose Seraphine Voss. She was, at that moment in that light, in front of everyone whose regard she had spent her life hunting, doing the entire job herself. She was upstaging herself, and she could not stop, because the not stopping was the disease and the screaming was only the fever. I have thought about what the guard did next 10,000 times, and I have decided it is the single most disciplined thing I have ever seen a human being do. He did nothing. Anything else, a flinch, a word, a step back, the smallest defensive lift of a glove would have given her what she needed. A story in which she was wronged, a man who reacted, a fight she could be the victim of. The cameras of the press were in the house. One twitch, and the morning story would have been the guard who lost his temper at a lady. He denied her even that. He gave her a wall of red wool and white glove and forward-looking eyes, and against a wall there is no fight. There is only a woman beating her hands and her voice on stone while the whole world watches and slowly, terribly, makes up its mind about her. And then she made the one mistake that turned the night from a humiliation into a disaster. And the disaster is the reason the man in red is a hero in this kingdom, and not merely a story stagehands tell. She spun away from him, flung herself away, really, the way a child throws itself from a thing it cannot win against, and her arm came round, and her train came round, and she was no longer 4 strides from the plinth. In her blind backward fury she had crossed the boards, and she struck the velvet rope, and beyond the velvet rope on its low plinth, under its sheet of museum glass, lit by one soft pin, stood the founder's lantern and its 300-year flame. The rope stand went over. I saw it from the grid as if it were happening underwater, very slow and very clear. The brass post tipping, the rope swinging, and the heavy iron base of the rope stand swinging with it on its short chain, a 12-pound weight scything around at the exact height of the glass case and the lantern behind it. One more half-second and the iron would take the case off its plinth, and the case would take the lantern, and the lantern would go to the boards from waist height onto 300 years of silence, and the flame that an old doorkeeper had kept alive in a tin through a whole war would go out on the floor of the house it was made for, on the night of its 300th year, in front of its king. She did not even see it. She was already screaming her way toward the wings, toward me, toward the dark, blind and deaf to everything that was not the storm inside her own head. Marguerite's voice came into my ear, "Tom, Tom, the lantern," and I was 40 feet up with my hand on the wrong line, and no power on earth could have got me down in time. The man in red moved. I have spent 19 years among people whose whole craft is moving well on a stage, dancers, acrobats, swordsmen who can fall down a flight of stairs and stand up smiling, and I have never seen anything like the economy of what that man did in the half-second he had. He did not lunge. Lunging is panic, and panic is slow. He took one stride, exactly one, off the honor stand and across the corner of the plinth, and his rifle came up not as a weapon but as a tool. He laid the length of it flat against the falling iron base and caught the swinging weight on the wood, killing its arc, turning a scything blow into a long dead push that he simply absorbed, his whole braced body taking the 12 pounds and the momentum of it and bleeding the force off sideways into the boards. The brass post he caught with his free white glove. The glass case rocked on its plinth, rocked, tipped, came back and did not fall. The lantern inside it never so much as guttered, and the flame that had crossed 3 centuries stayed lit because a man who would not move for a screaming star moved at last, the instant there was something worth moving for, and moved perfectly, and put himself between 300 years and the floor. Then he set the rope stand upright. He set the rifle back across his white gloves. He returned the one stride to the honor stand. And he looked at the dark of the house, eyes forward as if nothing at all had happened, as if he had not just saved the most precious object in the kingdom with the same wood he had refused to lift against the woman who nearly destroyed it. The whole thing, from the rope going over to his gloves crossing again on the rifle, took perhaps 3 seconds. I have watched the press footage since, slowed down, and I still cannot find the moment where he decided. There was no deciding in it. There was only a man who had spent 2 hours and a career, and very likely his whole life, learning the difference between a thing that wants you to react and a thing that needs you to act, and who, when the second one finally came, was already looking the right way. Seraphine Voss reached the wings, where I had come down at last from the fly floor too late to be of any use, and she was still screaming, and she did not yet know what she had nearly done. She rounded on me. "Did you see him? Did you see how he—" and then she stopped, because she had turned far enough to see back out onto the stage, and to see the rope stand standing where it should not have been standing if it had behaved the way she'd left it, and to see, beyond it, the lantern burning quietly under its glass, and to see, beside the lantern, the man in red, motionless, as though he had never moved at all. And to see, past all of that, in the great gold horseshoe of the house, 300 years of patrons on their feet. Not for her. I want to be very clear, because she could not be, even then. They were not on their feet for the singer who had stopped singing and screamed at a guardsman in front of their king. They were on their feet for the man in red. They had seen, every one of them had seen. The king in his box had seen, leaning forward with his hand on the velvet rail. They had seen a woman in a beautiful dress nearly take 3 centuries of their history off its plinth in a fit of temper, and they had seen a single still soldier step out of his stillness and catch it, and step back, and ask for nothing, and they were standing in the only language a great house has for that kind of thing, which is to rise and keep rising, until the sound of 300 years of people getting to their feet has said the thing that words would only cheapen. Seraphine Voss stood in the wings and watched her audience give to a stagehand still soldier the ovation she had walked onto that stage believing was hers by right, and I watched her face as the truth of it reached her, not the truth of what she had nearly destroyed, that came later and harder, but the smaller, immediate, unbearable truth that she had finally, completely, in front of everyone, lost the room. Not to a better singer, not to a younger star. To a man who had not spoken one word, had not looked at her once, had wanted nothing from her at all, and had, in the space of 3 seconds, done the only thing the whole evening would be remembered for. She said, somebody saw that. Somebody must have seen that he was in my. Miss Voss, I said, as gently as I had said everything to her that night, you need to come away from the stage now. She came. There was nothing left in her to fight with. The fever had broken all at once, and what was under it was just a tired, frightened, middle-aged woman in an expensive dress, who had spent so long being told the world would move for her that she had never once learned what to do on the day it stood still and let her run into it. I have no love for what she did. But I have stood in the wings with a great many ruined people over 19 years, and there is no joy in it. None, whatever you may think. And I took her arm and walked her past the cathedral boys, who looked at her the way the young look at a cautionary tale, and into the green room, and shut the door on the sound of an ovation that would not stop. The gala did not. That is the part people forget when they tell this story in the pubs near the theater. They tell the tantrum and the catch and the standing house, and they leave out that there was still a third of an evening to play, and that it was played, and beautifully, because a great house does not let one ruined woman ruin 300 years. Henshaw, in the prompt corner, made 3 quiet decisions in 90 seconds that I will admire until I die. He cut Voss's remaining numbers, moved the cathedral choir up to fill the gap, and sent word to the box, by the household liaison, that the gala would proceed to its climax on time, and that the founder's lantern was secure and unharmed. The king's reply came back in 4 words, which the liaison repeated to Henshaw and Henshaw repeated to me, and which I have kept like a coin in my pocket ever since. Thank the man. Continue. So we continued. The choir sang, the orchestra rose. And at the climax of the gala, exactly on time, the king came down out of his box and up onto the stage of the royal lyric, as the founding sovereign's heirs have done for 300 years, and he walked to the plinth where the founder's lantern burned under its glass, and the case was lifted away, and he took the lantern up in his own 2 hands. And then he did a thing that is not in the order of service, a thing that surprised even Henshaw, who knew the order of service better than he knew his own name. Before he turned to light the new lamp, the king stopped, and he turned instead to the man in red on the honor stand, and for a long moment the whole house held its breath, and the king inclined his head to the sentry, not a nod, a bow, a small true bow of the head from a king to a corporal, and said, in a voice that carried to the back of the gallery because the house had gone so silent you could have heard the flame itself, "The house thanks you. The flame thanks you. I thank you." The sentry's eyes stayed forward, his gloves stayed crossed. But I was close enough that time to see the only answer his post allowed him. The white glove on the rifle tightened, a 1/4 inch, the knuckles whitening and easing, the single small movement of a man receiving the only honor that has ever mattered to him and refusing, by long discipline, to let it move his face. The king saw it too. I think the king had stood beside enough of these men to know exactly what that 1/4 inch cost and exactly what it meant. He turned, and he lit the new lamp from the 300-year flame, and the gala ended as it was always meant to end, with a light passed unbroken from one century into the next, and standing beside the light, the man who had kept it from going out. That is where the pub story stops. But I was there for the rest. The quiet, unglamorous weeks of it, and the rest is where you find out whether a thing like that night actually means anything, or whether it was only a fine show. It meant something. I want to tell you first what did not happen, because the not happening is the whole point. The man in red was not promoted. He did not turn out to be a secret prince, or a decorated war hero, or a champion of anything. I asked, weeks later, through a household sergeant I drink with sometimes, and the sergeant laughed and said, "He's a corporal. He's been a corporal 11 years, and he'll likely be a corporal 11 more. And if you offered him a captaincy for that night, he'd ask very politely to stay on the gate, because he likes the gate." His name was Edwin Hale, and he was 34 years old, and the most extraordinary thing about him, the sergeant said, was that there was nothing extraordinary about him at all. He was simply a man who had decided completely that the job of standing still and watching was worth doing properly, and had then done it properly for 11 years until the one night it was the only thing in the kingdom that mattered. That's the trick of them, the sergeant said. People always want there to be a secret. A hidden general, a buried medal. There's no secret. He's just a man who meant it. That's rarer than any secret, and it doesn't photograph, so nobody believes it. Nor did Corporal Hale do anything at all to Seraphine Voss. He never spoke to her that whole night or after. He never made a statement. When the press, who had got hold of the footage within the hour, came baying for the guard's side of it, for the wronged man's story, the soldier she screamed at Angle, the easy revenge, there was no side to be had. He had not reacted. He had nothing to avenge. He had caught a falling lantern and gone back to his post, and a man who has done that does not need to say anything about the woman who knocked it, because the woman who knocked it is on 300 cameras knocking it, and the man who caught it is on the same 300 cameras catching it, and there is nothing left for words to add. His silence in the green room war became his silence afterward, and it was the same silence, and it did to Seraphine Voss in the weeks that followed exactly what it had done to her in the 2 hours before the doors opened. It gave her nothing to fight, and so she fought herself in public until there was nothing left. Because here is what happened to her, and it is the truest karma I have ever watched land, and not one hand was laid on her to make it happen. The world did to Seraphine Voss precisely what she had always demanded of it. It looked at her. It looked and looked. The footage of the tantrum went everywhere a thing can go. But and this is the part she could never have understood, the part that was her whole undoing. The world had not been looking away from her out of cruelty all those years. It had been looking away out of kindness, out of the ordinary human mercy by which we let each other's small ugliness pass unremarked. The stagehands who moved for her, the directors who bent, the husbands, the touring company, they had all in their way been protecting her, absorbing her tantrums in the dark where no ticket was sold, keeping the ugliness off the stage so the gift could shine. She had mistaken 20 years of being shielded for 20 years of being adored. And on the one night she finally forced the whole world to look at her without anyone left to shield her. It saw what the shielders had always seen and always kindly hidden, and it could not unsee it, and neither, at last, could she. She was not jailed. There was nothing to jail her for. She had not struck the guard, had not struck anyone, had knocked the rope stand in a blind fury, but had touched neither the case nor the lantern. The man in red had seen to that. The household, in its mercy, pressed no charge because, as the sergeant put it, there's no crime in being a fool in public. The being seen is the whole sentence, and the courts can't improve on it. The theater quietly released her from the rest of the gala season, and by mutual and unspoken agreement from the one after. The grand tour that was to have crowned her career was postponed, and then restructured, and then, in the way of these things, simply stopped being mentioned. No one banned her. No one needed to. Promoters are practical men, and the practical truth was that you could no longer put Seraphine Voss on a stage without the audience seeing, behind her, the ghost of a red coat and a falling lantern, and a gift, however true, cannot sing over a ghost like that. I saw her one more time, about a year after, and I will tell you about it because it is the only part of her story that gives me any peace. It was a wet Tuesday afternoon, off-season, the house dark, and I was up a ladder in the foyer changing a lamp in the case where the founder's lantern lives the rest of the year, between galas, under its ordinary glass, an ordinary small silver lamp that tourists walk past without a glance because nobody has told them what it is. A woman came in out of the rain in a plain coat with a scarf over her hair and stood a long while in front of the case, not knowing I was up the ladder above her in the dark, and when she lifted her face to look at the flame I saw it was Seraphine Voss, and that she had aged 10 years in one, and that she was not, for once, performing anything for anyone, because she believed herself entirely alone. She looked at the flame for a long time. Then she said to the flame, very quietly, not knowing I could hear, "I nearly put you out." That was all. She did not weep or rage or rehearse a speech. She said the one true thing, "I nearly put you out," and she stood with it. And it was, I think, the first wholly honest sentence she had spoken in 20 years, the first thing she had ever said to a room that was not designed to make the room love her. Then she pulled her scarf up and went back out into the rain, and I never saw her again, and I have always been glad I stayed still on that ladder and let her have that minute alone with the flame, because I think it was the only thing of any worth that the whole catastrophe ever gave her, and it would have been a cruelty to take it by clearing my throat. The man in red taught me that, in the end. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a person is to give them nothing, no audience, no reaction, no fight, and let them finally meet themselves in the quiet. I have thought a great deal in the years since about why that night fixed itself in me deeper than any first night I ever worked, and I think it is this. We are a theater. Our whole trade is the made-up storm, the painted thunder, the staged collapse, the diva's grand exit, the false fire that looks like ruin and is only light and gauze. We are very, very good at the storm. And we had that night the biggest storm any of us had ever seen, a real one, a true tantrum of a true star at the true apex of her true life, the most dramatic thing that stage had held in 300 years. And it turned out, when the real storm came, that the most important person on the stage was not the one making the storm. It was the one who would not be moved by it. All my life in the theater I had believed, the way Seraphine Voss believed, that the light belongs to the one who burns brightest and loudest and demands it most. That night I learned that the light belongs to whoever is willing to stand beside it in the dark and keep it from going out, and that those are almost never the same person, and that the kingdom, in its deep old wisdom, posts a man in red beside the flame and not beside the star, because it learned that lesson 300 years before I did. The founder's lantern still burns. It came through its 300th year, as it came through the fire and the flood and the war, because on the one night the danger was not a fire or a flood or a war but a woman's temper. The kingdom had put the right man beside it, not the brightest man, not the loudest, not a hero with a secret. Just a man who had decided that standing still and watching was worth doing properly, and who, when the one moment came that all that stillness was for, was already looking the right way, and moved exactly once exactly enough, and then stood still again as though it had cost him nothing, when it had in fact cost him 11 years of doing a quiet thing well with no one watching, so that he would be ready on the night the whole world was. Corporal Edwin Hale is still on the gate, the last I heard, which is exactly where he asked to be. He never told the story. He let me tell it. I think he would say, if you could get a word out of him, that there is nothing to tell, that he simply did his job, that any of his fellows on the honor stand would have done the same, that the flame is what matters and not the man who happened to be standing next to it the night it nearly fell. He would be right about the flame and wrong about the man, in the way that men like him are always right and wrong in exactly that proportion, and it is the proportion, in the end, that makes them worth a whole hall of patrons getting to their feet. I close the case now every season with a little more care than I used to. I make sure the rope stands are weighted right and set well back. And when the tourists walk past the small silver lamp without a glance, I no longer mind, because I know the secret of it, that it is not the lantern that is precious, nor even the flame, but the thing the whole night taught a foolish stagehand who thought he understood his own theater, that the brightest thing in any room is never the one screaming to be seen, but the quiet one, standing still in the dark, that simply will not let the light go out. The diva upstaged herself. The flame stayed lit, and the man in red went back to his post, eyes forward, unmoved and unbroken, exactly as he had been before, which is the only ending such a man ever wants, and I have come to believe, the truest happy ending there is.